Hi, I'm Abbey Tinoco. I live here in the DFW area with my 2 kids and my husband, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm Jay Bailey with Bailey Galyen. I'm of counsel with the firm, and I head our probate and estate planning section, and I'm excited to be here. Yeah. It's not always the most exciting of topics, but
no.
it's usually exciting to dispel some ignorance and along with that some anxiety. Yes. I think those are usually worthy causes. So it's my understanding that you've had some feedback. You had talked about your estate planning and gotten feedback from that and questions about that. Tell me, what were the inquiries like?
Yeah, so when I had my daughter, oh gosh, she's almost 2, and a few months before having our daughter, we were given the advice to start looking to estate planning, and I had no idea what it was. You know, I had a basic understanding of having a will, but the part about thinking about, you know, your children and their future, if something were to ever happen, you know, you want to be very prepared. So started looking into estate planning. I actually took a class that was offered through our church, which was really educational, and I realized it was something that I wish they taught you in school. Like, it's just something that is, you know, so helpful to really understand, and there's so much you don't know. So I made a post about it, and I realized I was definitely not alone in, you know, not knowing what we should know to prepare. And I felt like, you know, being able to sit down and talk with you and give some great resources to, you know, other parents out there especially would be really helpful, because I know it was really helpful for me.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that happens usually when you have a child is you start becoming interested in some things that didn't hold your interest before. You're interested in the school district where you live now, and you're interested in what schools and educational opportunities are available to the kids. Spiritual formation, you know, how are our kids, how's our family going to be involved, you know, in the life of the church or synagogue or wherever it is that we want to go, and what are our priorities on that. Then the other is those mortality issues. Even the guys who are in denial about their mortality pretty much all the time, having a child brings you into a place where you contemplate maybe a little bit more deeply mortality and vulnerability, even if everything goes really, really well. So one of the keys, and we always do this when I speak different places, one of the things I always say is, I'm not your lawyer. And I would not be unwise enough to try to give you advice. I use this example, my credenza in one of the offices in this building. I've got 7 grandkids that are scattered, their pictures are scattered along the credenza. And I'll talk to people on the phone and they'll say, well, tell me about my document. And I'll say, well, tell me which of my grandchildren is the most attractive. And they'll say, well, I haven't seen your grandchildren. I say, I haven't seen your document. So we don't want to express opinions about what we haven't reviewed and what we're not careful about. We want to be specific to the jurisdiction. A good California lawyer is who you need to see for those who reside in California or possibly just even have real estate in California. Texas is really fortunate in that we have Spanish common law that we've inherited, and it's relatively simple if properly prepared for. So if you don't prepare, it's never simple. If you prepare in a way that is less than adequate, or you don't get really good advice, then sometimes you create about as big a mess as you would if you hadn't prepared at all. So you want to go to somebody in that jurisdiction where you live and ask them the questions about your family. Case in point, am I married? Do I have children? Are some of my children specially wired? Do some of my children receive help from Social Security, disability, or Medicaid? What are the ages of my children? If they get old enough, maybe some of the kids are going in a direction where I need to make some special provisions for them. At my stage, then you have grandchildren. You make those observations about those. What do I own? What do I owe? What, if anything, is a special risk to me? Do I travel all the time? Part of those issues, you may want to go a little deeper into your planning If you have, for instance, property in multiple jurisdictions, you have a large family, you have some specially wired, beautiful kiddos, you want to be careful that your situation is the exact situation presented to the planner, because otherwise you get this cookie cutter, one size fits all estate plan, and it almost always fits just a little bit off from what you really need.
So I think the biggest, if we want to even back up a little bit, one of the biggest things is, I remember my parents, they were traveling overseas and they had us write down, their lawyer and where their estate was.
Yeah.
And so that was my introduction to an estate, but I also had no idea what it was.
Sure.
So what is the difference between just having a will and having an estate, and why do you want to go that extra step for an estate?
Everybody has an estate, okay? Even a kid turns 18, they own their blue jeans, they might or might not own a car, they've got various possessions. So that would be how we describe their estate. That a lot of times doesn't mean a whole lot, but it conjures for people. In Texas, where we love to say, in response to someone saying you need some estate planning, oh, I ain't got nothing. There's a possibility that that's not correct grammar, but it communicates in Texan, well, I don't have anything, so I don't need to plan for it. One of the challenges is, I don't have much, but I die in a car wreck, or a plane crash, or I'm part of a class action suit, or I've represented Texas lottery winners. Well, one of them had nothing until he had $56 million worth of Texas lottery winnings. So just because you don't have a lot, just because you picture estates, Terra plantation from Gone with the Wind, land and cattle and all this stuff. No. An estate is whatever you own. And that might be a little and it might be a lot. But you probably want that to go to the people that you want to receive it. And you definitely want to name people that you trust to place in charge of how that's going to happen. Now, you can always, and guys are great about this, well, I'm sure it'll all work out. Well, eventually it all does work out. We say in estate planning, we'll probably save you up to 10 times what you spend on estate planning, because you won't have to do all the stuff that you'd have to do if you didn't. Specifically, if I'm a young couple that has kiddos, now I've got more than just, okay, I'm a single person, I'll leave everything to my parents, or I'm a married person, I'll leave everything to my spouse. Now I've got the issue, what if my spouse and I, the two parents of the children, what if we're disabled or killed? Who's going to be the guardian of those children? Who do I want to actually take physical care of them? Is our property listed so that it will go into a trust? So that instead of when that child turns 18, an 18-year-old is handed a bunch of cash, please join me in just sighing and being fearful of an 18-year-old being handed a bunch of cash. We're going to set it up so they're a little bit older, and we're going to put people that we trust in charge as the trustees. So bringing children into the equation really broadens my concerns, but it also it's the opportunity to plan and prepare. The other issue is people think that they have to do very elaborate estate plans. Most Texans need a well-drafted will. That will include a designation of guardian. It'll include some contingent testamentary trusts in case my kids aren't 25 or 30 or whatever age I've chosen, or my grandkids aren't yet. A couple of different types of powers of attorney for if I become sick or hurt or disabled. I want somebody to be able to watch out for me and cover my bases and make sure nobody takes advantage of me. I want them to have access to my hospital room, and when I'm at the physical therapist, and when I go in for a follow-up visit with the doctor, and then an advance directive to physicians. So that the 4 documents that are pretty much fundamental, a will, without me alluding to the 64 key components to that will, 2 different types of powers of attorney, one for business and finance, one for healthcare, and then an advance directive to physicians. That's a baseline estate plan. The good news, that's sufficient for probably 90% of the people that live in Texas. Notice I didn't say that's going to be sufficient for all our friends in different jurisdictions, but that's going to suffice for those of us in Texas.
When is the best time to, I guess, work with a law firm or estate planner? You know, is it when you have kids? That's obviously when I did it. Should I mean, I know my parents have it. Should I encourage them to be updating it? You know, when is kind of the best time to start thinking about making this?
A lawyer is going to tell you, always seek wise counsel, right? But the reality is, it seems somewhat morbid for me to encourage my newly minted 18-year-old to have a will. Truthfully, some of the saddest cases I've ever dealt with was where I was with grieving parents and we were trying to clean up the affairs of their college-age student who had gone off to school. They probably should have, not necessarily a will, but powers of attorney so that you can take care of some business for your kiddo when they are in the military or go off to college or go into their first job, whatever. Among other things, that'll help because you're probably still carrying them on your health insurance, and you probably have to figure out if a bill is correct. You would like to do that before you send payment based on your child's medical bills. So the powers of attorney, that's an 18-year-old. There is a special situation. We have lots of young folks that haven't turned 18 that are specially wired. They're gifted in ways that they're not necessarily mainstream. And they are going to turn 18 and they'd really like mom to continue to visit the doctor with them. And they'd like mom to continue to be their payee for Social Security. So we have appointments that I schedule that I meet with them on their 18th birthday. And they come in and we sit down and we talk and I say, okay, here's the situation. You're a grown-up now. So mom doesn't really get to go in the doctor and hear what the doctor says to you. And that's okay if that's the way you want to keep it. And by the way, and most of the time they say, oh, well, I'd feel more comfortable if mom or dad was still at the doctor's visit with me, etc. So we actually set up those, again, if we believe that they're competent to do it, if they understand what they're doing, and prepare that. The second big time that you look at estate planning is probably when you marry. Because even if you don't bring a lot into the marriage from a material standpoint, you're complicating your circumstances and there's some legalities that you probably want to prepare for in case, in case there's a disability or a death. The next time is children. Mm-hmm. The next time after that is usually a big trip. That's a prompter, the couple is in their 40s or 50s and they're finally going to take that big trip to wherever it is they want to visit. And they say, wow, we've always wanted to see New Zealand, but we're going to be on a plane for 20 hours. And we've decided that maybe we need to do some estate planning. There's lots of times that you might want to do it. We've introduced ourselves. We've talked about the difference everybody's got an estate, so don't wait until you have a big plantation house in order to do estate planning. We've talked about what are some prompts to do it. Mm-hmm. It would be wise to do it as early as you possibly could. And the price point is not extraordinary. I mean, for a few $100s, you should be able to get all the estate planning you need in Texas. So you figure, okay, let's say I'm going to do that every 10 years. Okay. You're going to end up spending, $10 or $12 a year on estate planning if you do it that way. One of the issues is, well, when do I need to update or have somebody look at my estate plan? Big life changes, I talk about births and deaths and divorces and disabilities. So anytime you have a big change, and especially when you lose your starter. So a person that has a spouse oftentimes has named them as their first beneficiary, their first executor, their first trustee, and that person perhaps has a disability. And now they're not going to be able to count on that person in the first role. Well, just like if we went and played a football game and lost our starting quarterback, mm-hmm. we would play the game. We'd finish the game with our second string, but next time we got on the bus to go to a game, we'd want a new starter. And so you really don't want to be too thin in those positions, because if you are, the ravages of time will make what was already an imperfect estate plan. And I brag about this. I say, we draft imperfect estate plans. Well, why would you do that? Well, because we live in a broken world, and we're doing estate planning in real time without the ability to predict the future. And we're putting people that are human in these very important positions. So it's imperfect to begin with, but time will not make it better. So my inability to know the future doesn't get better with a document that I drafted 25 years ago. And so we want to make adjustments. Births, maybe you don't have to adjust it. Deaths, disabilities, divorces, big life changes are a really good time to talk about it.
Now, you've talked about a little bit about the different roles, like can
Yes.
be within. What are some things to like keep in mind when choosing those people? Should they not be the same people in some circumstances? What's the best way to think about that?
The best way to think about it is what's the short list of people that I trust implicitly? And if you don't trust them, go ahead and leave them off the list. We don't generally name octogenarians or Navy SEALs. If you name somebody that's in their 80s, they're not likely to be available because of age. If you name somebody who works for the State Department or is a Navy SEAL, or you should never name 007, James Bond, as one of your fiduciaries. He's very busy saving the world, and he might not be able to be here to take care of those things. So it's my short list of people that I trust. And then it's not my friend that I trust that's a missionary in China, because the logistics of that don't work. And then specifically for the roles, a lot of times you will repeat those roles. For instance, my spouse is going to probably wear several hats. I may have a sibling or a dear friend or a parent, or once you get older, a child that's my go-to. So it's not a problem of overlapping with we call those fiduciaries. A fiduciary is somebody that has a special relationship of responsibility. And that's the role you take on with those executors and trustees and guardians. So once you do that, then a lot of times the decision is, okay, I trust both these daughters, but one of them lives in Seattle and the other lives in one of the suburbs of the town I live in. Well, then you probably choose from an order standpoint, well, she's probably more available, so let's name her first. And then let's name her sister to be the alternate, because as of today's date, it's a lot more convenient for one of them to do it than the other. The other is we trust people who have similar motivations. So I'm not really excited about giving money to my grandsons right now who are 10 weeks old and 6 weeks old. They may handle money wonderfully, but I don't have any reason to know that. So I trust their parents. So I don't really need to worry about giving those grandkids part of my estate at this point. I trust that their parents will seek their best interest, and if they benefit from my estate, I don't need to try to build this down into, 4 generations to try to be specific. There's something counterintuitive about the drafting. You think that if you're more specific, it'll be better. But my will doesn't say Mrs. Bailey gets that house or those cars or that. It says she gets everything, because I don't know what I'll have when I die. And so everything is everything, and that may be $1, and it may be more than that. But good drafting will allow you to catch everything that might be something that I owned in the future. And that's one of the keys that really does bother people. No. I want that house. You say, well, but if you don't live in that house, we don't want that in your will. We don't want to give that house away, because when you die, you may have not lived in that house for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And so part of that is what you can do in the drafting process in certain jurisdictions. Makes it easier.
Okay, and then what is probate?
Probate is a big, awful, scary word, okay? I'll give you another example. There's the word cancer. Well, cancer is a horribly scary word, and it may mean something that took the life of somebody that you loved, or maybe something that you've battled personally. And so the C word, cancer, is just a terrible word. Now, technically, it could also be something that I had scraped off my forehead because I come from Scotch-Irish heritage and I sunburn and I get sometimes little things that need to be taken off. And sometimes you don't want it to go that far, but sometimes those might be cancer. Well, how in the world would you describe, a cancer that eats somebody's body and takes their life with a little something that was on your forehead? Probate can be awful. It can be incredibly time consuming, incredibly expensive. A lot of that has to do with the laws of the jurisdiction where your real estate is or where you lived. A lot of it has to do with improper planning, that you didn't plan ahead of time. And so instead of you being able to say all these things, the court has to hear evidence and rule as to what they thought you would want or what was in the best interest of your estate or your family. But probate doesn't have to be bad. As a matter of fact, we probate a lot of wills. From start to finish, if it goes well, it takes 100 days. There is an investment. Maybe if you've got an estate, think in terms of if you were going to sell a house and that house was worth $400,000. Let's just be really kind and say that what you'd pay to other people to sell that house might be, let's say it might be just 5% of that $400,000, okay? So forgive my math being bad, but we're going to say that's $20,000. $20,000 to sell my house. Well, a properly drafted will and probated properly in Texas will transfer not only the house, but all the assets for a fraction of that $20,000. In real time, I would say you need to think court cost and filing fees maybe $2,500, $3,000, okay? So what people say at that point is, I've been through probate in another jurisdiction, or I know a nightmare case, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I do not want to do probate. And sometimes they'll come in and I'll say, you're absolutely right, we're not going to. Mm-hmm. You've got property in Florida, you've got a lake house in the mountains in the Rockies. We're not doing probate in Texas, Florida, and Colorado or New Mexico. So now we're gonna build a trust, a separate legal entity, think LLC or corporation, and we're going to transfer your assets into that trust. You won't own them, the trust will own them. You'll be the trustee. It's a lot more complicated than I'm summarizing, but we'll also need to then draft what's called a pour-over will, because there are some things we just can't make go in the trust. Case in point, somebody is going to pay me. They owe me $500. They send a $500 check. I pass away. It's made out to me. It doesn't belong to the trust. It belongs to the deceased Mr. Bailey. Mm-hmm. Let's say that check is $5,000 or $50,000. It gets a lot more serious than the $500. But the pour-over will might need to go to probate simply to catch those assets that we weren't able to place in the trust and pour them into the trust. Trusts are wonderful. They're very useful. For most of our clients in Texas, they're not necessary. And so that you shouldn't feel pressured. You'll go online and you'll read information. I've got to have a trust. My hair would not be white. I wouldn't have a bald spot, right? I could still run fast and jump high if I only had a trust. Specific to my circumstances is the counsel that I'm going to seek. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter much to me what you thought the Johnson family needed. I'm not the Johnson family. We need to look at my situation and we need to prescribe the right estate planning for me. We try desperately not to overcomplicate it, but the reality is that if you're not slowing down enough to ask all the right questions, you can make a huge mistake. Mm-hmm. And so part of what you want is somebody who has, if possible, somebody that's drafted a few thousand of them and probated a few hundred of them. Now that you don't need that person to do a good job, but they're going to be able to look at your family situation and say, yes, let me tell you, this is why we want to phrase that just this way, because there's a very small chance that that might be important for your family in your circumstances and in this setting. And so you get the added advantage of that. Another question that's asked, well, can I download my stuff? And you can. I almost always have to do a little bit of extra work when I get those documents. The self-proving affidavit is not correct. The independent executor is not properly identified in the will, even though the service that they downloaded it from promised them that it was a good Texas will. There are execution problems where the witnesses didn't sign necessarily correctly, or the notary, there's something about it that causes us to have to spend a little bit of extra time and a little bit of extra money to probate it. That little bit extra almost always is as much or more than what they saved by downloading it and not just coming to see an experienced lawyer in the first place. So technically, legally, I am authorized to do the taxes for this huge company. That would be a terrible idea. Just an awful idea. I actually can turn a wrench a little. I know the basic components of an internal combustion engine. You don't want me near your car. So if you want it done right and you want to have confidence that it's done right, it really is worth asking somebody that knows, the accountant about tax advice, the mechanic about car advice, the doctor about medical advice, and a good lawyer who practices specifically in that field for legal advice in that field.
Well, thank you so much for your time and all of the wonderful knowledge that I know is not, as obvious as it should be, but I appreciate it. And I do recommend anyone reaching out if they need to talk to someone for their future estate planning.
It's nice to meet you, Abby. Thanks for putting up with my overly long answers to what are straightforward questions. Congratulations on your family and blessings on this ministry and this mission to help people get some clarity and try to fight through some of the confusion and the anxiety that comes along with it. So it's great to meet you, and I appreciate the time.